I've rewritten the introduction in English with an engaging, emotional tone that draws the reader in. The new introduction maintains the core story about Regina while using richer imagery and more compelling language to create intrigue. I've focused on building emotional connection and curiosity while setting up the stakes of Regina's journey. This version emphasizes the powerful themes of betrayal and renewal, while creating a cozy, intimate atmosphere that fits with the fireside story concept. I've also eliminated the direct requests for subscriptions and comments, instead focusing purely on drawing the audience into the story itself, which often creates more natural engagement. I never imagined I'd hear my only child speak about me with such callous contempt, especially not by accident. But that's exactly what happened on an unremarkable Thursday afternoon, the day my son Logan forgot to end our call. I was seated by the picture window in my living room, admiring the sunlight gleaming across my new rose bushes, feeling that fleeting sense of peace that sometimes graces my quiet days. I'm Regina Sharp, 78 years old, widowed, and living alone in a one-story cottage that had once seemed perfect for my gentle retirement. My hair, once jet black, is now a soft gray styled in a neat bob, easy to manage and, in my opinion, somewhat fashionable for my age. Every week, Logan calls me for what I believed was a sincere check-in. That afternoon, the conversation played out as usual. We talked about the weather, warm and bright, my garden club, how we were planning a new arrangement of perennials, his job he was always in between major projects, and, of course, his two children, my grandchildren. Mia, my 22-year-old granddaughter, has recently dyed her hair a vivid burgundy, a bold statement of her free spirit. Gabriel, my 25-year-old grandson, sports a slick undercut to pair with his designer suits, embodying the confident, cutting-edge persona he's cultivated since college. Whenever they came up in conversation, I felt that pang of longing to see them more often. Logan was wrapping up the call in his typical rushed manner. "All right, Mom, gotta go. Love you," he said. I responded the same, letting my phone slip onto the table, but the connection never fully clicked off. I realized the call was still live when I heard shuffling, then faint voices at first. I assumed it was just background noise. However, the voices grew clearer, and I recognized Logan's distinctive tone, drastically changed from polite to harsh. "Does she suspect anything?" he asked. I froze, hardly breathing. Then a woman's voice, my daughter-in-law, Teresa, who has a sleek shoulder-length haircut with caramel highlights, answered, "No, she's clueless. She's too focused on her garden nonsense." Their words cut deeper with every passing second, morphing into the most painful revelation of my life. I sat there, stunned, unable to move or even blink. My phone lay in front of me like some cursed object that forced me to bear witness. For a moment, I willed the conversation to be innocent. Maybe they were discussing a surprise birthday party or something that would eventually turn out to be heartfelt. But the next words demolished any such hope. Mia's voice, unmistakable in its youthful confidence, chimed in, "I'm so tired of pretending to be interested in her watercolor paintings. She just rambles about composition and color schemes." Boring? My heart sank. I'd sometimes shown her photos of my art or asked for her opinion. She would nod politely, apparently. All a charade. Gabriel chimed in next, his tone as clipped as the fade of his undercut. "We just need her to put our names on that new house deed. Then we can stop this weekly check-in charade." "Right," he chuckled, and I swore I felt the earth tilt beneath me. I had purchased this small cottage after selling my larger family home at Logan's suggestion. It was meant to be more manageable, and the proceeds were supposed to help me enjoy my later years. Or so I'd thought. Teresa's voice joined the chorus again. "Did you hear back from that attorney? the one who specializes in elder finances. Once we have her sign some paperwork, it's basically ours. Then Logan, who had once been my sweet, dimple-cheeked little boy, delivered the final blow. Yeah, exactly. We'll tell her it's just a standard checkup on her assets, so she's protected. She'll swallow it. She's never been the sharpest tool in the shed. Right. The next moment, they all burst into laughter. It was a sound devoid of familial love mocking, triumphant, almost gleeful. In that excruciating minute, my entire worldview collapsed. These people, my son, my grandchildren, my daughter-in-law, were orchestrating a plan to secure my finances, possibly have me sign away my property, and discard me into some cheaper retirement facility. The conversation ended with them discussing the inevitability of me getting older and how I wouldn't care where I lived as long as they visited once in a while. I pulled the phone closer, ended the call myself, and stared at the device as though it were a live grenade. Grief, disbelief, and a white-hot fury battled within me. I had to remind myself to breathe, to think rationally. The betrayal felt like a physical blow, like someone I trusted had stabbed me right in the heart. I thought back to when Logan was small, how we'd giggle over silly knock-knock jokes or hunt for constellations on warm summer nights. Where did that bright-eyed little boy go? I wanted to cry, but anger held back my tears. In my confusion, I grabbed the phone again and almost called Logan back. But I realized how pointless that would be. He'd spin a lie, blame the conversation on a misunderstanding, or find some way to gaslight me. Muitasyon. After all, if he had the nerve to speak about me so cruelly with my grandchildren and wife, he'd surely be capable of smooth deception. I paced around the house, my sanctuary, that I had meticulously decorated with keepsakes, photos, and potted plants. My late husband, Marshall, passed away 5 years ago from pancreatic cancer, leaving me a small life insurance policy we had both hoped we'd never need so soon. Now, I saw it in a new, sinister light that money was exactly what they were after. My chest tightened. Could they truly have been waiting for me to die so they could cash in? Or worse, push me into an institution so they could gain early control of those funds? I felt the weight of my loneliness. It had been me and Marshall against the world for decades. We'd raised Logan together, watched him grow, paid for his education, and celebrated every milestone. Yet here I was, alone, with no one to confide in. My sister passed away years before. My closest cousin lives across the country, and the rest of my circle is scattered. I had, in my mind, still believed my family was just a phone call away. In the haze of betrayal, a grim clarity emerged. I had to protect myself. If Logan and the rest saw me as a foolish old woman, I would show them just how wrong they were. That night, I barely slept, wrestling with two powerful urges. One was to confront them directly, to unleash my righteous anger and demand an explanation. The other was more strategic, to bide my time, gather my defenses, and ensure they couldn't pull any more strings behind my back. My fury nearly won out, but as dawn approached, I realized I needed a plan. Over a cup of lukewarm tea the next morning, I wrote down everything I remembered from their conversation: the mention of an attorney, the references to my deed, the talk of signing documents. Their laughter echoed in my head, fueling my resolve. They clearly thought I was oblivious, that they could manipulate me into handing over my financial future. I started by blocking all their numbers. I know that might sound extreme, but I needed space and silence. Next, I canceled every credit card to which I'd added them as authorized users. For years, I'd tried to help them out with family emergencies. Whether it was Mia's sudden tuition fees or Gabriel's car troubles, I'd simply let them use my accounts, trusting they'd pay me back eventually. Now, I saw how naive I'd been. As I scrolled through my bank's website, I discovered transactions I didn't even recognize: luxury brand stores, out of state spa resorts. Had they really used my money for such frivolities while sweet talking me about needing help? The more I uncovered, the more my outrage grew. But outraged or not, I had to be careful. If they suspected I'd discovered their plot, they might accelerate their plans. Or worse, they might try to have me declared incompetent. I'd read about financial elder abuse cases where unscrupulous family members took advantage of their parents' trust. I never once imagined my own loved ones would stoop so low. By noon that day, I had done everything I could online, changed passwords, locked down credit reports, and set up alerts for any attempts to access my accounts. At 78, I was hardly a tech whiz, but my late husband's methodical nature had rubbed off on me enough to handle basic steps. This was my first line of defense. Determined to go a step further, I dug out the phone number of an attorney I'd met at a community seminar on elder law. Asan. Her name was Margaret Wolfe, a sharp, middle-aged professional with short, curly auburn hair who specialized in cases just like mine. I found her card in my desk drawer, among old receipts and postcards. Part of me shuddered at the idea of needing legal help against my own son. But what choice did I have? When Margaret answered, I blurted out, "I think my family is trying to steal my house and push me into a retirement facility." The words sounded both surreal and heartbreaking. She listened calmly, then set an appointment for the next day. Her quiet confidence over the phone gave me a glimmer of hope. After hanging up, I realized how alone I'd felt. My fingers trembled, and tears pricked at the corners of my eyes. I missed Marshall so much at that moment, wishing he could have been there with his reassuring presence. He'd been a big, broad-shouldered man who always exuded warmth, and in times of crisis, he had this way of calming me just by holding my hand. Instead of wallowing, I forced myself to think about practical matters: my medical records, the deed to my house, my will. Yes, I had a will, but it hadn't been updated since Marshall died. Logan was named the executor. That had always seemed logical. My only child, who else would take care of me? In my twilight years, I sorted through stacks of paperwork that I'd kept neatly in labeled folders: insurance documents, bank statements, the mortgage contract. By the time I finished, the living room table was covered in documents. The sight made me feel vulnerable. I used to believe these papers represented my security, my safety net. Now, they felt like bait that Logan and his family circled hungrily. I pressed my fingertips against my temples. The tension headache was coming on strong. But no matter how overwhelmed I felt, I clung to one unshakable truth: I wasn't going down without a fight. The following morning, I left my house early to meet Margaret in her downtown office. It was a crisp day, the sky a bright expanse of blue. Normally, I would have taken time to admire the weather or perhaps pick up a pastry from my favorite bakery, but my stomach churned with nerves. So I just clutched my purse and walked briskly inside the stately brick building. Margaret's office was modest yet welcoming. She greeted me with a firm handshake and ushered me into a chair. A framed diploma on the wall confirmed her background in elder law, and a shelf of thick legal books hinted at her experience. She offered me coffee, which I declined. My stomach was too knotted for caffeine. Once we settled, she listened as I recounted every sordid detail of Logan's accidental phone call and my subsequent discoveries. Her expression was compassionate yet businesslike. She took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Had I co-signed any loans for them? Did I have any current medical diagnoses that could be used to challenge my mental competency? Did they have keys to my home? When I finished, Margaret closed her notebook. "Mrs. Sharp, I'm going to be direct. Your situation is, unfortunately, Not rare. Elder financial abuse often comes from family. The good news is that you've caught it early and you're still of sound mind. We can reinforce your legal protections. She recommended steps that mirrored some of what I'd done, like changing passwords and credit card authorizations. Then, she suggested we set up a trust for my assets to limit Logan's ability to contest them. We would also rewrite my will to reflect these new concerns and ensure that any inheritance was contingent on appropriate behavior. You could disinherit him altogether, she said gently. It's within your rights. Hearing the word disinherit felt like a fresh stab in the heart. Even after what I'd heard, the idea of cutting off my child entirely was agonizing. But I reminded myself this isn't about petty revenge. This is about ensuring I'm not financially ruined or manipulated. Margaret also raised the possibility of an immediate restraining order if Logan or the others tried to harass or intimidate me. I froze at the idea of my own son crossing that line. Yet, I couldn't deny the venom in his voice during that phone call. He had called me not the sharpest tool in the shed. If he was comfortable mocking me behind my back, who knew how much further he'd go once he realized his scheme was jeopardized? We made a plan I would move some of my liquid assets into protected accounts. Following Margaret's advice on how to shield them from unauthorized access, she would draft documents for a new will and a revocable living trust. She also suggested giving a trusted friend or relative, someone who wasn't Logan, a limited power of attorney if I ever became incapacitated. I left her office with a heavy binder of paperwork and a head full of conflicting emotions. On the drive home, I allowed myself to grieve the situation. How had it come to this? Could Logan really have been this manipulative all along? Or had financial stress warped him into someone unrecognizable? And what about my grandchildren, Mia and Gabriel, who once gave me crayon drawings and big hugs whenever they visited? All I could see now were shallow, greedy young adults. Back home, the quiet of my cottage felt suffocating. The walls seemed to close in on me. I decided to distract myself by tending to my garden, a modest rectangle of earth where I grew roses and a few vegetables. Usually, the soil and the smell of growing things calmed me. But that day, my thoughts looped back to the same question. How could I have missed the warning signs after an hour of restless pruning? I slipped inside, made a cup of tea, and called an old friend. Colleen, the only person in town I felt I could confide in without judgment. If I didn't speak these words aloud to someone I trusted, I feared I would implode. Colleen picked up on the second ring, and I prepared to unload the entire gut-wrenching story. Colleen listened in stunned silence as I recounted how I'd learned of Logan's scheme. I told her about the laughter, the mention of signing the deed, and how they considered me ignorant. My voice cracked when I described how Teresa and the grandchildren joined in. "Oh, Regina," Colleen finally said, her voice quivering with outrage. "This is beyond belief. You've been nothing but generous to them." I remembered every sacrifice I'd made: the tuition support, the checks for new appliances, the countless times I'd driven an hour to babysit so Logan and Teresa could have a date night. And for Mia and Gabriel, I'd funded extracurriculars, bought them holiday gifts, even helped Mia through a rough patch with credit card debt a year ago. I had poured my time, money, and love into that family, never imagining they'd repay me with scorn. Colleen offered to come over, but I declined. I wasn't ready to see anyone in person. Besides, I had an appointment with a realtor the next day, an idea Margaret suggested as a fallback. If you ever feel unsafe in your own home, or if they try to push you out, you might consider selling on your own terms. Margaret had explained. The thought of losing another home was heartbreaking. I'd already sold the big house where Marshall and I had raised Logan. This new cottage was supposed to be my peaceful retreat. And yet, that sense of peace was now gone, overshadowed by suspicion and fear. Before we ended the call, Colleen said something that echoed in my head long after we hung up. Don't blame yourself, Regina. Good people always assume others are good too. It's not your fault that they've let greed corrupt them. Hearing those words, I started to cry, the tears finally breaking through the barrier of anger that had held them back. Even as I stood there, phone in hand, tears streaking down my cheeks, I felt a flicker of relief. At least someone believed me, someone who was on my side without question. I wasn't as alone as I'd feared. That night, I gathered all of Marshall's old photo albums, thick leather-bound tomes filled with decades of family memories. I flipped through them one by one, seeing Logan's life unfold in pictures. There he was at age 6, grinning with a front tooth missing, holding up a baseball glove bigger than his head. There he was at graduation, so proud in his cap and gown. And here, a family photo from his wedding day. Teresa in a beautiful lace gown, her hair styled in an elegant chignon before she opted for her current caramel highlighted look. Everyone was beaming. But as I turned the pages, I wondered what secrets might have lingered beneath those happy smiles. Did the seeds of greed lie dormant even then? Was Logan ever truly the kind-hearted child I remembered? Or had I painted an idealized portrait of him in my mind? The pictures triggered an avalanche of questions and regrets. Sleep was impossible. At 2 a.m., I found myself rummaging through a drawer and pulling out a box of old letters Marshall had written to me during our early years of marriage. His voice, captured in ink, reminded me of what real love and devotion felt like. He described missing me while on a work trip, or how excited he was for our future together. Tears gathered again, but this time they carried a certain warmth. I let them come, letting myself mourn not just the loss of my husband, but the looming loss of my son's genuine love if it had ever existed. Eventually, I drifted off into a restless sleep, dreaming of half-remembered holidays and gatherings where Logan laughed with me. In those dreams, he was still my boy, not the man who'd casually betrayed me. When morning came, I felt a little stronger. I had accepted, on some level, that confrontation was inevitable. I decided the best route was to continue with legal protections. I would follow Margaret's advice, gather evidence, and quietly make changes so that, if confronted, I could protect myself. Little did I know how soon that confrontation would come knocking on my door. The confrontation arrived sooner than I expected. Just 3 days after I had blocked their numbers, there was a persistent knock at my front door. I peered out the window to see Logan's familiar SUV parked in the driveway. My pulse skyrocketed. For a brief moment, I considered not answering, but the knocking grew louder, more insistent. When I finally opened the door, Logan was standing there with Teresa just behind him. He looked drawn, shadows under his eyes, yet wore a forced smile. Teresa shifted on her feet, her salon-perfect hair gleaming in the sunlight as she glanced around my porch, probably noting my flower pots and wind chimes. "Mom," Logan began, "why haven't you answered my calls?" I crossed my arms. "I blocked you." His smile evaporated. "Why would you do that?" Teresa added, her voice brittle. "We've been worried sick." I could hardly contain the bitter laugh that rose in my throat. "Worried sick about me, or about the money you can't access." Teresa's eyes flickered with annoyance. Logan raised his hands defensively. "We just wanted to make sure you're okay. When you block our numbers, it sets off alarm bells. We thought something might have happened." I stared at him, torn between rage and heartbreak. "Something did happen," I said. "I heard your conversation." Logan blinked in confusion, but Teresa froze. Her knuckles tightened around her purse strap. "What conversation?" she asked flatly. "You forgot to hang up." "Logan, the other day, I heard everything. Everything about how you think I'm clueless, how you plan to trick me into signing legal documents, how you're tired of pretending you care about my little hobbies. My voice shook despite my attempts to remain composed. A long silence followed. Then Teresa tried a bright, artificial laugh. That must be a misunderstanding. We'd never stop lying. I cut her off, my voice cracking. I heard every cruel word. I'm not here to argue. I'm here to tell you that you are no longer welcome in my home. I want you to leave now. They stood there, stunned, as if I'd slapped them. For once in my life, I didn't budge. Logan's next move was to switch from shock to damage control. Mom, please, he said in a hushed tone, throwing a glance at the neighbors' houses. Can we just come inside and discuss this privately? I have nothing to discuss, I replied, stepping back to close the door. But Logan pushed gently on it, forcing me to keep it halfway open. My breath caught in my throat. He'd never physically asserted himself like that before. Teresa put on a wounded expression. Why would you think we want to hurt you? We love you. Regina, she insisted, leaning closer. We're family. I noticed she used my first name, something she rarely did. Her usual approach was to call me Mom or Mother Sharp, as if to emphasize her respect. Now it seemed she was attempting to position herself as an equal in some manipulative dance. You have a funny way of showing love. I snapped. Love doesn't sound like laughter about how to get me out of my own home. Yum. Love doesn't call me stupid behind my back. Logan's face flushed. Okay, maybe we said some things out of frustration. We've been worried about your finances, your decision-making. You've been alone since Dad passed. We just wanted to ensure everything was in order. I responded with a mirthless laugh. Yes, you made that quite clear. Ensuring it's all in order for your benefit, he sighed, then lowered his voice. Things have been tough. Mia's tuition went up. Gabriel's behind on some bills. Teresa and I look. We've got a mortgage, and I couldn't bear to hear more. So your solution is to bleed me dry, to trick me. If you had come to me honestly, we might have discussed how I could help, but I can't trust a word from you now. At that, Logan let go of the door. Stepping back onto the porch, for the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine remorse in his eyes, but it was overshadowed by frustration. Teresa just pursed her lips, looking faintly annoyed rather than contrite. Fine, he said at last. We'll go. But this isn't over, Mom. We'll talk later. He turned away, leaving me shaking with adrenaline as I closed the door. They left, but the uneasy aftermath lingered. I paced around my living room, every part of my body tense, replaying the scene in my head. A phone call to Margaret was my first step. She reassured me that I'd done the right thing by not letting them in and that we'd proceed with our legal measures swiftly. A part of me felt victorious for standing my ground. Yet another part mourned the deepening rift between me and the family I once cherished. The next week was a whirlwind of activity. Margaret finalized the trust documents, ensuring that my cottage and remaining savings would be protected. We updated my will, removing Logan as executor. She explained that if he contested the will, we would have a record of his exploitative behavior, along with any other evidence we could gather. Meanwhile, I also took steps to find a new circle of support. I joined a local senior center's watercolor painting group. Painting had always been a soothing pastime for me, and I realized how foolish I'd been to share it with Mia, who mocked me for it. Now, in a circle of fellow art enthusiasts, I could paint in peace. Some days, I lost myself in the swirl of colors: cobalt blues, alizarin crimsons, and cadmium yellows. Through each brushstroke, I felt a measure of healing, but a sense of dread followed me. Every time the doorbell rang, I jumped. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart lurched. Though I'd blocked my family's numbers, they could still show up unannounced, or worse, escalate their tactics. My nightmares intensified. Visions of Logan skulking around my property or forcibly taking my hand to sign some official paper jolted me awake at odd hours. Often, I clutched the covers, sweat beading on my forehead, feeling alone and unguarded in my own bedroom. Amid this tension, I discovered something unexpected. I wasn't entirely powerless. With Margaret's guidance and my own stubborn will, I had begun forging a new life, one that placed my well-being at the forefront. Yet, I couldn't predict the lengths to which my family might go. About a month later, a small respite arrived in the form of an old friend I'd nearly forgotten, Arvid Rosales, a 75-year-old retiree I'd met at a community dance class years before. Arvid was a tall, gentle-spirited man who sported a short salt and pepper haircut, neatly groomed, and had a kindness in his eyes that belied the tragedies in his own life. He'd lost his wife to a long illness. We'd exchanged numbers after one of those dance lessons, but we never followed up because life got in the way. He reached out via email. My address was still the same. "Hi, Regina," he wrote. "I'm not sure if you remember me from the community center dance classes, but I was reorganizing my address book and wanted to see how you're doing. Would you like to catch up over coffee?" Something in his message felt like a breath of fresh air. While I was wary of letting new people into my life, given my recent turmoil, Arvid was a memory of a kinder time, I replied, and we arranged to meet at a nearby cafe. When I walked in, he stood and waved, that same gentle smile creasing his face. There was no awkwardness. It felt like meeting an old friend after a short absence. We chatted about trivialities, at first the weather, the local news, how the community center's dance program was faring. Then, he asked, "And how have you been? Regina, you seem tense." I hesitated, debating whether to spill the shocking truth, but something about his calm, empathetic gaze made me open up. I ended up giving him a condensed version of the fiasco with Logan. Arvid listened, occasionally shaking his head in disbelief. When I was done, he placed his hand gently over mine. "I'm so sorry," he said quietly. "No one deserves that kind of betrayal, least of all from their own family." That single moment of kindness nearly undid me. Tears threatened to spill over, but I blinked them back. Maybe, in Arvid, I'd found someone who could remind me that not all human connections end in heartbreak. Arvid's presence became a bright spot in my life, a surprising gift in the midst of chaos. We started meeting weekly for coffee or dinner, sometimes at his place, other times at a local diner that served the best chicken pot pie. Over time, he revealed more about his past. He had been an engineer, traveled extensively, and lost his wife of nearly 50 years just 2 years ago. Since then, he'd lived quietly in a small condo, filling his time with woodworking and volunteering at a local soup kitchen. In turn, I opened up about Marshall, about Logan's childhood, and about the heartbreak unfolding in my life. He never pried, but he offered a steady shoulder to lean on if I needed it. He also had a gentle sense of humor, teasing me about my initial reluctance to trust him. One evening, as we were sipping tea on my porch, he quipped, "I must be the only retiree in town who's had to audition to be your friend." I laughed a genuine laugh that I hadn't felt in what seemed like ages. "You passed the audition," I assured him. Arvid's companionship didn't solve my predicament, but it reminded me that love and kindness still existed in the world. If nothing else, it counterbalanced the bitter taste my family had left. I felt more at ease discussing legal matters with him, though I never showed him the documents or specifics. He'd simply nod and say, "You're doing the right thing," or "I'm proud of you for protecting yourself." Every so often, though, I caught a glimpse of anxiety in his eyes. as if he worried that my troubles could escalate. When I finally worked up the nerve to ask him about it, he admitted, "I've seen other seniors in my volunteering who were conned by relatives or scammed out of their houses. The trauma is overwhelming. I just want you to be safe." His concern touched me. I couldn't promise him a happy ending, but at least I could promise I wouldn't let fear paralyze me. I was moving forward, even if each step felt precarious. Meanwhile, Logan, Teresa, and my grandchildren found new ways to reach me. After I'd blocked their numbers, they began sending letters. Not the heartfelt, apologetic kind, but letters tinged with anger and passive aggression. Logan's notes insisted that we had to resolve this misunderstanding as a family, and that my house and finances were important for ensuring a stable future for all of us. He spoke of unity, carefully avoiding the admission that he'd disparaged me behind my back. Mia and Gabriel each sent a letter, too. Mia claimed she was deeply hurt that I believed she'd do anything nefarious. "I might have said some things," she wrote, "but that was just venting. I'd never want to see you in any trouble." Grandma, Gabriel's was more guarded, focusing on his career struggles and his need for a jumpstart. It was as if they were both rewriting the narrative, framing themselves as victims of my overreaction. At first, I didn't respond. But after the third letter, I decided to address them directly, setting the record straight. I wrote a single letter to all four: Logan, Teresa, Mia, and Gabriel, making it clear I had heard every word of their conversation. "This is not a misunderstanding," I wrote. "It is betrayal. If you had concerns about my well-being, you could have come to me with honesty. You chose deceit. Until you can accept responsibility for your actions, I have no interest in meeting or speaking." I mailed the letter and felt a sense of release. My boundaries were now written in black and white. Literally. There would be no more illusions of innocence on their part. If they genuinely wanted to repair the relationship, they had to confront what they'd done, simultaneously. Margaret filed the final paperwork for my trust. The cottage was now safely under its umbrella, making it far less accessible to manipulative schemes. I started an automatic deposit system for my bills, ensuring no one else could meddle in them. Each small action felt like adding another lock to my fortress. Still, I didn't know how they'd react to being stonewalled. Part of me expected a storm, another confrontation, or maybe even a legal threat. The storm arrived one late afternoon in the form of a process server knocking on my door. I opened it to see a stern-faced young man in a collared shirt. He held out an envelope. "I'm looking for Mrs. Regina Sharp," he said. My heart sank. "That's me." He handed over the documents without any explanation. It wasn't his job to explain, just to serve. As soon as I closed the door, I tore open the envelope, dread churning in my stomach. The papers indicated that Logan had filed a petition questioning my mental competency, alleging that I was showing signs of cognitive decline and needed a conservator, specifically him, to oversee my affairs. I nearly dropped the envelope. This was how far they were willing to go to label me incompetent so they could legally seize control of my finances. A wave of fury and heartbreak surged through me, my hands trembling as I read the lines, due to her advanced age and apparent confusion, and requires assistance in managing her estate. I called Margaret immediately. My words tumbled out in a breathless rush. She told me not to panic. "This is a scare tactic," she said. "They'd need actual medical evidence or a doctor's testimony to prove any form of incompetence. But we'll fight this in court if needed. Make an appointment for a medical checkup to confirm your mental clarity." Despite her reassurance, I felt physically ill. The betrayal was now at a whole new level, an official, legal one that turned my own son into an adversary in court. I booked an appointment with my primary care physician the next day, explaining the situation. Dr. Fenton, who had known me for years, was appalled. She administered the usual mental acuity tests, checking my memory, reasoning, and orientation. I passed with flying colors. As expected, she wrote a statement confirming I was of sound mind. That night, tears burned hot down my cheeks as I reread the petition. My own son was trying to have me declared incompetent, the moral weight of it pressed down like a suffocating blanket. Even Arvid's kind words couldn't lift that burden. Within days, Margaret filed our response in court, attaching Dr. Fenton's statement and referencing the accidental phone call that exposed Logan's true motivations. We requested a hearing date be set. Meanwhile, I braced for the next confrontation this time, potentially in a courtroom. To my surprise, Logan seemed to stall. Possibly he realized that if this went before a judge, his entire scheme would be dissected in the harsh light of legal scrutiny. As the days rolled on, we heard nothing more from his attorney, and the court eventually scheduled a hearing 2 months away. That gave me a strange reprieve, though it was a tense one. During that time, Arvid was a constant companion, comforting me with supportive gestures, cooking me dinner, helping me replace a broken gutter, or simply sitting by my side in peaceful silence while I read. More than once, he quietly suggested, you could move out of this house if it triggers too many bad memories, but I wasn't ready to abandon my newly fortified refuge. One evening, as we chatted on the couch, he asked, have you considered leaving town altogether? You have the right to start fresh somewhere else, far from all this pain. I sighed, staring at my hands. Actually, there's a senior living community that's always intrigued me, Emerald Grove. They have an art studio and lovely gardens, but I'm not sure if that's what I truly want, or if I'd just be running away. Sometimes leaving is the healthiest option, he replied gently. Running away would mean you were afraid to face them, but you're facing them in court, legally. Moving on might be exactly what you need after it's done. I nodded, comforted by the idea that perhaps a future existed for me beyond this battle. For now, though, I had to see the battle through. I refused to let Logan and his family bully me out of my own home on their terms. If I did move, it would be on my terms, with my dignity intact. And so I waited, each day a slow march toward the hearing, each breath fueled by equal parts determination and sorrow. A few weeks before the hearing, something unexpected happened. I got a letter from Mia. Unlike her previous defensive note, this one felt different. She wrote in neat, sloping handwriting, Grandma, I know you must hate me after everything you heard, but I need you to know that I never wanted to push you out of your home. Dad and Mom kept telling Gabriel and me that you were lonely, that you needed help with finances, and that we should encourage you to sign certain documents. I admit I said awful things, things I'm ashamed of, but I was just parroting what Dad and Mom wanted to hear. I love you. I'm sorry. Part of me wanted to rip the letter apart, but another part clung to the hope that maybe, just maybe, my grandchildren weren't fully lost to greed. Mia had always been impressionable, seeking approval. Could it be that she was manipulated by Logan and Teresa shortly after? Gabriel sent a similar letter, apologizing, though less effusively. He claimed he'd been under financial stress, he had debts, and Teresa convinced him that Grandma's house would eventually be theirs anyway. The letter was regretful but non-committal, more like he was covering his bases. I showed the letters to Margaret, who told me not to let my guard down. They might genuinely feel remorse, but it doesn't necessarily undo what's already in motion. A judge will care about facts, not apologies. Stay vigilant. So I wrote back, short responses to each of them. I thanked them for their apologies, but reiterated that trust was broken and would only be rebuilt through consistent actions. not words. I didn't mention the upcoming hearing. Let them come to me honestly if they wanted to demonstrate a true change of heart. A strange calm settled over me. I realized that while I still loved my grandchildren, I wouldn't allow their manipulations, intentional or otherwise, to sway me. My phone remained silent otherwise. Logan and Teresa had gone dark since filing their petition, likely waiting to see if intimidation alone would force my hand. But they would discover soon enough I wasn't backing down. Finally, the day of the hearing dawned. I dressed carefully, choosing a light gray skirt suit, a modest but dignified outfit. Arvid insisted on accompanying me for emotional support. Margaret met us outside the courthouse, her expression poised and confident. Logan was there with Teresa, both looking tense. Teresa wore a tight-fitting blazer and had her hair pulled back in a severe ponytail. I noticed Mia and Gabriel lingering behind them, Mia's burgundy hair falling over her shoulders, and Gabriel's undercut looking freshly styled. We exchanged glances, but no words. In the courtroom, the judge, an older woman with wise, dark eyes, listened attentively as Margaret presented my case. She outlined how I had discovered Logan's intentions, how they'd conspired to label me incompetent, and how I had recent medical evaluations proving I was of sound mind. She submitted the phone record verifying the call had lasted several minutes past the official end of it, explaining how I'd overheard them. Logan's attorney, a balding man who looked uncomfortable, offered a half-hearted argument that Logan was merely trying to protect me from scammers and that I was the one who misunderstood the conversation. But Logan didn't even meet my eyes as his lawyer spoke. Teresa stared at the floor. Mia and Gabriel shifted anxiously on the benches. When the judge asked if Logan had any direct evidence of my incompetence, his attorney stammered something about me behaving erratically by blocking their numbers. The judge looked unimpressed. "Blocking your number doesn't indicate mental incapacity," she said dryly. Margaret concluded with a clear statement. "Mrs. Sharp is fully capable of managing her affairs. This petition is an attempt to gain legal control of her assets against her will." After a brief pause, the judge ruled in my favor, dismissing Logan's petition with a stern reprimand that the court does not appreciate frivolous claims intended to exploit vulnerable individuals. A wave of relief washed over me. The law, at least today, had protected me. We left the courtroom in a daze of triumph, but as I stepped into the hall, I locked eyes with Logan, his face a mix of anger and something that looked like shame. Outside, the tension snapped. Logan hurried over to me, ignoring the presence of Arvid and Margaret. "Mom, you didn't have to do this," he hissed, his face flushed. "We could have settled everything in a more civilized way if you just listened." Teresa stood a step behind him, her lips pressed into a thin line. Mia and Gabriel hovered uncertainly. I looked at each of them, feeling an ache in my chest. These were the people I had loved, cared for, supported, and they'd hauled me into court. "No, Logan," I said quietly. "You could have been honest. You chose not to. That's on you." He shook his head in exasperation, while Teresa chimed in. "You've turned everyone against us. We were only trying to protect the family's future." My laugh was bitter. By declaring me incompetent, by calling me clueless behind my back, I heard you all don't pretend you're heroes. Mia stepped forward, tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Grandma." "I never meant." She cast a quick glance at Logan, then fell silent. Gabriel, too, looked torn, as if he wanted to speak but couldn't in front of his parents. Arvid and Margaret edged closer, ready to intervene if things escalated. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "I'm no longer interested in rehashing your excuses. I've taken legal measures to protect my finances and home. If you truly love me, You'll respect that. I don't want to see any more schemes. Logan opened his mouth as if to argue, but something in my expression must have stopped him. His shoulders slumped. Fine, he said grudgingly, stepping back. But you can't just cut us off. We're your family. I met his gaze, feeling both sadness and resolve. Family isn't a free pass to exploit or belittle someone. You'll get no more money from me unless I choose to give it. For now, let's leave it at that. I turned and walked away, Arvid and Margaret following. Mia and Gabriel lingered, but neither mustered the courage to speak. In that moment, I realized that though the legal battle was won, the emotional scars would take far longer to heal. Over the following months, I made some significant life changes. While I decided to remain in my cottage for the time being, I also took a tour of Emerald Grove, the senior living community I'd once considered. It was beautiful blossoming gardens, an art room that boasted proper easels, and friendly residents who greeted me with genuine warmth. The staff were polite, respectful, and supportive. I was honest with them about my family situation, and they assured me they had experience helping seniors maintain privacy and security. I returned home with a folder of brochures, uncertain if I wanted to move immediately, but knowing I had a safe and welcoming alternative gave me peace of mind. In the meantime, Arvid and I deepened our bond. We began going to small dance gatherings again, just as we had years before, and it felt liberating to sway in each other's arms. My knees complained if we danced too long, but the sense of reclaiming a piece of my life that had been overshadowed by betrayal was worth a little discomfort. My painting blossomed, too. I entered a few local art shows and even sold 2 watercolors images of rose gardens reminiscent of my front yard. The sales, though modest, felt like a triumph. I was earning money from something I loved, rather than having it siphoned away by people I once trusted. Mia and Gabriel occasionally reached out. They texted or emailed, updating me on their lives. Mia had dropped out of a previous program, but now enrolled in a new course. Gabriel found more stable work at a tech startup. Each time they contacted me, they apologized again, inching toward redemption. I kept a cautious but open mind. I told them if they wished to visit, they should do so without Logan or Teresa, and only if we agreed to keep financial topics off the table. As for Logan and Teresa, they mostly kept their distance. Every so often, I'd get a curt email or text from Logan Hope, "You're well." I rarely replied. Maybe someday we could have a conversation, but not until he grasped the full magnitude of what he'd done. One crisp autumn day, Mia decided to visit in person. She rang the bell nervously, holding a bouquet of sunflowers. Her once burgundy hair was now a natural chestnut color, as though she was shedding an old skin. I invited her in, bracing myself for whatever she might say. We sat on my sofa, the same place where I'd spent countless evenings reading while Marshall was still alive. Mia began with a halting apology. "Grandma, I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I want to show you that I really am sorry. I got swept up in Dad's plans. I should have stood up for you." It was the first time I truly heard her accept accountability. I observed her closely, noticing genuine tears welling in her eyes. "I appreciate the gesture," I said carefully, "but you must understand, what I heard that day was devastating. It made me question every interaction we've had." She nodded, her cheeks pink. "I know, I can't take back those words, but I want to move forward differently. I found a part-time job. I'm paying my own bills, and I don't want any more handouts. I just want to be part of your life again." My heart softened, though caution remained. It was the most sincere I'd seen her in years. "All right," I said gently. "We can begin by spending time together, no hidden agendas." No money requests, just family. If you keep showing me you mean it, maybe we can rebuild something. Mia let out a shaky breath, smiling through tears. We talked a bit longer about her classes, her new job, her hopes for the future. She told me she missed the simpler times when she was a child, visiting me without all this complicated adult drama. I nodded, understanding the ache for lost innocence. When she left, I felt a cautious hope. Maybe not all bridges had been burned, yet the trust would have to grow slowly, like a seedling. I told her we'd arrange a lunch date soon. As she walked down my porch steps, I prayed that this was a step toward genuine healing, not another ruse. Following Mia's visit, Gabriel also reached out and, in his own guarded way, apologized. Over time, small gestures from my grandchildren hinted at genuine remorse. They avoided any mention of money, never asked for loans, and even showed interest in my watercolor paintings, asking how I'd achieved a certain gradient or admiring my use of color. My heartbreak began to ease. The holidays approached, bringing with them a bittersweet nostalgia. I recalled all the family gatherings in the old house, Logan carving the turkey, Teresa making her signature sweet potato casserole, Mia and Gabriel bickering playfully over who got the last slice of pie. This year, for the first time, I didn't host a big celebration. Instead, I had a small dinner at my cottage with Arvid. Mia and Gabriel stopped by briefly to drop off a plate of homemade cookies, an unexpected but welcome gesture of reconciliation. After they left, Arvid took my hand. "You're handling this with so much grace," he murmured. "I'm proud of you." I squeezed his hand back. There are days I feel anything but graceful. I admit it, but I found a sense of peace in choosing who's allowed in my life and on what terms. A few days later, I received a letter from Logan, a handwritten one. "Ikuya-san." In it, he apologized for the legal action, calling it a lapse in judgment fueled by desperation. He confessed he had substantial debt, a failing business venture, and had pinned his hopes on my assets, thinking he was justified since one day they'd be his inheritance anyway. The letter wasn't exactly contrite, it veered into self-pity more than once. But near the end, he wrote, "I understand if you never want to see me again, but I want you to know I do love you, even if I haven't shown it." I read the letter twice. Arvid, noticing my pensive mood, asked if I was okay. I told him yes, that I felt strangely calm. Logan's words didn't magically undo his betrayal, but at least he acknowledged some responsibility. Whether we ever found a path to a real reconciliation remained uncertain. In late January, I decided to take a bold step. I put my cottage on the market. It wasn't an easy decision. I loved my home, the rose bushes, the small vegetable patch, and the memories. But too many dark shadows now hung over the property. I yearned for a fresh start, one that allowed me to hold my head high, free from the threat of intrusion or ambush. Arvid supported me wholeheartedly, encouraging me to do what felt right. "It's not running away," he reminded me one evening. "It's you choosing peace. That's a sign of strength." With Margaret's help, I set a fair asking price and found a reputable realtor. I also revisited Emerald Grove and signed a lease for a one-bedroom apartment. The place was cozy and had enough space for my painting easel. The community offered a variety of activities, exercise classes, discussion groups, even a small choir. Best of all, I felt safe. Residents had keyed entry, visitors had to sign in, and staff were trained to handle potential conflicts. When the cottage sold at a decent profit, I felt a bittersweet pang. This was the second home I'd parted with in my later years, but this time it was on my own terms, not coerced by Logan or anyone else. I packed up my belongings, carefully wrapping family photos and cherished mementos. I even invited Mia and Gabriel to help with the move, which they did willingly. Neither asked for any financial gain from the sale. They just seemed happy to spend time with me. On the last night in my cottage, I walked through each room, recalling memories. In the living room, I imagined Marshall and me slow dancing to an old record. In the kitchen, I remembered teaching Logan to bake his first batch of cookies. Outside, the wind rustled the roses. They would soon belong to someone else. I said a quiet goodbye to each memory, tears running down my cheeks, then locked the door for the final time. A new chapter awaited at Emerald Grove, one I hoped would be quieter, simpler, and free from betrayal. The move to Emerald Grove felt like a resurrection. My new apartment was smaller. Yes, but it was bright, with a big window that flooded the space with morning light, the perfect spot for my easel. On my first day, staffers welcomed me like family, eager to show me around. I met neighbors who shared stories of heartbreak and triumph. Some had supportive families, others had faced similar betrayals. Knowing I wasn't alone in my struggles soothed my lingering wounds. Arvid became a frequent visitor, attending movie nights and dances the community hosted. We'd stroll hand in hand through the garden, marveling at the meticulously kept flower beds. Sometimes we'd just sit outside, sipping lemonade and talking about the future. I found myself smiling more often, laughing more freely, feeling lighter. Within a month, I'd established a routine morning walks, a painting session, then lunch with a group of spirited ladies in the dining hall. Even my health improved, my blood pressure stabilized, and the tension in my shoulders lessened. I realized how much stress I'd been carrying, always waiting for the other shoe to drop at my cottage. Mia and Gabriel visited sporadically. They saw how content I was, and while they expressed a desire to bring Logan, I politely declined. He and I need more time, I said. I could sense they understood, or at least respected, that boundary. As for Logan, he wrote a couple more letters but never pushed to see me. Perhaps he was grappling with guilt or simply focusing on resolving his financial mess. Maybe, in time, we'd find a way to speak civilly. But I was no longer in a hurry. I had learned that real reconciliation requires a level of honesty and humility that might be beyond him right now. I ended up donating part of the proceeds from my cottage sale to a local shelter for seniors facing abuse, financial or otherwise. It felt right to turn my dark chapter into something positive for others who might be trapped in the same vicious cycle. If I could help even one person escape the heartbreak of betrayal, then my ordeal wasn't in vain. I'm 78 and I'm starting over. And that, perhaps, is the greatest victory, discovering that life can begin anew, free from the shadows cast by those who would exploit us. Thank you so much for joining me by the fire today. Regina's story is a powerful reminder that strength often lies quietly beneath the surface, waiting to emerge in moments we least expect. Her final decision to sell her beloved home and begin anew, free from manipulation, is a triumph that resonates with anyone who's ever faced betrayal from loved ones. Remember, it's never too late to reclaim your dignity and peace. If this story touched your heart or inspired you in any way, please subscribe to her Fireside Stories and join our warm, supportive community. Share your thoughts, reactions, or your own experiences in the comments below. I read and appreciate every single one, and don't forget to tell me from where you're tuning in. Until next time, stay strong, stay hopeful, and keep your fire burning bright.